discipline. Have some discipline.
You're listening to Hart Beat Radio.
Bob Johnson, live from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, from the Hart Beat Radio studios. Hart Beat Radio presenting Ask Bruce Anything Wrestling. We've had thousands of our fans on Hart Beat Radio via Facebook and Twitter ask us to have a show where fans of Hart Beat Radio can call in and ask Bruce anything pertaining to wrestling. I'd like to introduce none other than Portland's own Matt Merz, who's a phenomenal historian. What can you say about Matt? Anyway, welcome.
A lot more. You could say a lot more, Bob. You could call me a luminary. You could call me a professional visionary. There's many, many terms to describe a man of my gifts and my talents.
For sure. Anyway,
a great
fans,
heel promo cutter.
Matt Merz.
Speaking of that, yeah, I do want to do a heel promo cut here because I know people are going to call in, so I want to address something right off the bat for everyone listening. When you call in, let me give you an example of a bad question to ask a professional wrestler, a real live professional wrestler who's wrestled 300 nights a year for 20 years. Here's the question you don't ask. Hey, Bruce, do you remember that time back in '88 when you were in Regina with Brian Pillman and you guys had that match? That was a great match. Do you remember that? Bruce is going to remember that match. He's had 300 of them a year. He's not going to remember that one match. You better make it a little more impactful, like that big cage match that involved, Archie the Stomper Gouldy, and you bled all over the place, and there was a riot. Bruce might remember that match, but he's not going to remember that one match in Regina from back in '88 that you really liked, but it really didn't have any significance beyond your personal enjoyment of it, fans. So come with some more thoughtful questions,
I'm going to now introduce wrestler, booker, promoter, historian, author, extraordinaire from Calgary, Alberta, the one and only from the Hart family, Mr. Bruce Hart. Welcome back to Hart Beat Radio, Bruce.
Oh, hi, Bob. It's great to be back with you and Matt, and I'm looking forward to it. I have no pre-anticipation what they might be wanting to ask or whatever, but I'll look forward to trying to answer the questions and offer perspective on whatever it is they want to send in. So.
Okay, so my first question, Bruce, is what is the best example of heel heat you could imagine seeing a kid get nowadays? What are the things throughout your incredible career? What was the guy that you saw that you said, now that's a heel right there. That's how it's done.
I think back in the day the medium for getting heat was easier too, maybe with the old, talking about Ed Whalen and all that type of thing, where you would cut a promo and usually say something that was designed to elicit a reaction or piss the people off, or it was all kind of a combination of things, and then you'd go out in the ring, and I think WWE's perverted the whole system because in order to get heat, you have to actually have a little bit of an establishment of the rules. Like right now in WWE, the rules are so loosely adhered to, or if everything's legal and nothing's illegal, which seems to be virtually the case these days, then it begs the question: how does one get any heat? So, but beyond that, it was a lot of little subtle things to the point where the fans had to subliminally feel as if their booing and all their other reacting potentially could throw you off your game or get to you. So the really good heels back in the day would react to the fans and give them some sense that, whatever input they were offering had a bearing on the outcome. There was a lot more integration of, emotions and back and forth. But another big part of it, is back in the day they used to have some really awesome baby faces who had that propensity for selling, that And there was as my dad always used to say, a very pronounced difference between selling and dying. You know, the guys who were just dying were you're not getting much reaction, but you always looked like you were fighting back and endeavoring to overcome adversity, and which was kind of integral part of getting the fans into it. But so it was kind of a fairly simple but multifaceted endeavor, and some of the best heels I recall were the guys who either were just out and out scary, like Abdullah the Butcher types and Bad News Allens and Archie the Stomper Goldie types, who reminded me of that shark in the Jaws movie, where there's this kind of overwhelming sense of kind of foreboding, imminent, catastrophe about to happen or something. But some of the other ones that used to get, great heat were just the ones who were kind of snide and obnoxious and pushed the right buttons. And almost all the great heels that I know used to be very keenly aware of crowd reaction, and if the crowd wasn't reacting to something they were doing, they would do something else. They were always keenly aware of what was getting a reaction and what was not getting one. So those were a lot of the little things. Some of the things that they used to do back in the day to get heat were, back in the day with playing a Russian or an Iranian or something that immediately caused a reaction, and they would do it a lot more, in my estimation, a lot more subtly back in the day, and not as cartoonish as it's become. But some of the modern day, some of the young guys breaking in today would do themselves a favor if they watch some old tapes and
what is it they should be specifically watching for, Bruce? Like, one piece of advice I give young people is watch wrestling with the sound turned down and see if you can figure out the story, because if you can, that's a truly talented wrestler. If he can tell you a story without the commentator being there to guide you through the match, that's something that a real wrestler can do. And there's another thing that Ric Flair said once that I thought really does apply well to a heel, especially, we talk about the Russians and the Iranians, but what if you are just a normal white guy like Rowdy Roddy Piper? I mean, how does just an average white guy get over into today's environment when you're not going to be a Russian, or you can't be an Iranian, or you can't be the Ugandan giant? And Ric Flair said that the secret is everyone likes to know you're doing good, but no one likes to know you're doing better than them. And I think that is that little touch of arrogance. You don't get that with everyone. There's always the exception. There's, the madman from the Sudan, Abdullah the Butcher, who doesn't have to act arrogant because he's a bloodthirsty maniac. He acts like a bloodthirsty maniac. So are there any things you've seen just the average white guy do, gimmick-free? Like, Roddy Piper didn't really have a gimmick short of the bagpipes. Like, that was kind of it, He used his voice to talk people into the building.
I would say, as I said before, the vehicle itself, the wrestling, it's one of the things that's been kind of compromised. Like back in the day, you'd have, like Stampede Wrestling, most of the promotions, even the WWE back in the 80s or whatever, it was a lot more cut and dried. You'd have the commentators and you'd have the between match interviews and that type of thing. One of the toughest things for these poor indie guys these days is the lack of a viable propaganda vehicle to get heat. Like, I saw a show out here a month or so ago, and they had these guys from Winnipeg come out, and they had a few not bad workers and all like that. But because there's no TV, most of the fans don't know who the hell they are until they get there. Most of them are all doing what appears to be canned, sterile shtick and all like that, and somehow they need to connect, whether it's getting on the mic or pre-match coming in, getting heat, or they almost need to work harder at kind of establishing who they are. And I go to these shows, and most of the fans on a regular basis aren't quite sure until 5 minutes into the match because the guys are so kind of unable or inept at establishing things. They're not quite sure who even the heel or the face is, unless there's one guy looks really extreme, or one guy's wearing a swastika, or doing the terrorist thing or something like that. A lot of times the fans aren't quite even sure, So
there's one thing I've noticed also, Bruce, that the wrestlers today, the heels in particular, don't do. Every babyface is real good at running around ringside slapping hands, but the heels don't walk around and jaw jack with the people on their way out to the ring. Walk with arrogance and jaw jack with just one person. Just find that one person that you're gonna goad a little bit. And you start to watch that spread around the ring, and even if it's not a person that is necessarily going to get up in your face, the person next to them will get up and get in your face, and it'll just trickle around that room. And it's all about that control and the limits of control, that these guys aren't controlling the crowd anymore. And I think that does go back to there are no rules. What are the rules of wrestling, Bruce?
A good question. I would even advocate to WWE. They need to almost go back to, square one, so to speak, and establish whatever the hell the rules are, without looking like they're becoming ultra-conservative or anything like that. But I remember back in my day, the rules were quite cut and dried, so the simple things, like if you threw a guy over the top rope, it was a DQ. But if you ran a guy's head into the post, it was a DQ, or if you were caught with a foreign object, it was a DQ.
Okay.
And,
let me slow you down right here, Bruce, and let me go back to the technicalities and the psychology of wrestling. At what point in a feud are you going to be in a position where you would run a person's head into a ring post? Because to me, that makes me think you got to be pretty mad at a guy to do that, or you're a cheating bastard.
Oh yeah, you would always build it up, and it was if you took away all, if some idiot, for example, decided in the NBA or the NFL that you could be catching the ball outside the boundaries, and was like I see them fighting out on the floor all the time, or if you dropped the ball and they said you caught it, or all that. If you started deviating from all the preconceived rules and regulations, at some point the fans would just go, screw this. I'm tuning this out. If guys are not shotting each other in the NBA, and a guy's going up for a layup, or somebody pulls out a brass knucks and nails it, it's inconceivable. My estimation, WWE's done themselves no favors in diluting the rules or throwing the rule book out the window, because after a while, if everything's legal, as I said before, how the hell do you get any heat? Invariably, the baby faces been getting, screwed all night, and finally he gets the brass knuckles or the whatever, the heel's been using, and all of a sudden the baby face is caught with the brass knucks or the blackjack or whatever the gimmick is. And those are all simple ways to, generate heat and get the people back the next week, that type of thing,
I've got a caller, area code 563. Welcome to Hart Beat Radio.
Hi, this is Don Feldman, going through some old WrestleManias, and I watched WrestleMania 26 again, where Bret gets his receipt, where Bret gets to screw Vince. And Bruce, you were the special referee, so I was going to ask you if you had any good memories of that. It must have been really cool with all the Hart family there, and if that was your WrestleMania moment.
I remember they called us in prior to the match to run the finish by us. They had Michael Hayes and Vinny and Hunter, and they ran this finish by us, which essentially entailed we were supposed to all come to the ring, and there was some fictitious preamble where Vinny supposedly made out like he had bribed us all or something like that, and then Bret asked us if we got our money, which we didn't. Would have been nice to have, And then Bret said, "Okay, I'm glad you all got your money, because I'll double that, and you guys are now, going to serve my purposes, not Vinny's or something like that, then the rest of the match just basically was kind of the Hart family and Bret and me, the referee, ganging, poor old Vince, and we were the faces, of course, and they ran it by us. Michael Hayes says, "What do you think?" And I said, not to be raining on anyone's parade, but I think it's, a bunch of crap. I don't like it at all. It's, we're the faces and we look like a bunch of, heels, about a dozen of us beating the crap out of a 65-year-old non-wrestler. It doesn't really give me any great vibe, but I threw back at them. I said, I'm not telling you guys how to run your business. You guys obviously do whatever you want anyway. But I said, if you look back on the this whole situation, where you got this is Bret's first match back since his near fatal stroke, and so you already have that thing in place, and then subsequent to that, Bret you guys staged some charade maybe a month prior at that WrestleMania where Bret was further injured in some backstage limousine ambush or something like that, so Bret was further skills diminished, and then I said, but there was a couple of other dynamics. We had Hunter and Vinny, Hunter and Shawn, who was kind of in the midst of some kind of a quasi-return at that time, too. But so I said there was a little bit of an issue with Shawn and Hunter, and then subsequent to that, you got Bret and Shawn had a big kind of reconciliation just prior to the match. So they're all listening. And so I said, you got these various pieces in place, and that's what it's all about anyway. And in wrestling is taking advantage of whatever dynamics you have at your disposal and trying to capitalize or maximize the potential of them. So they're all listening. So I said, if I was orchestrating the schematics for this, I would have maybe have Bret, who's already injured from whatever that charade you guys did in the back with the limousine and his first match back since the stroke and all the other. And given that Vinny's the consummate heel and head of the evil empire and all that stuff, so I would have Vinny looking like he's beating Bret within an inch of his life and the big cell sympathy and all like that. And I said finally after the big cell, Bret starts rallying a bit and kicking Vince's ass and looking like he's on the verge of doing the sharpshooter or whatever. And I said at that point, you maybe have Stephanie come running up to the ringside, take the ref, and she's hysterical that Vinny's, her dad's getting his ass kicked. And at that same point, you have Hunter hit the ring, coming in and ambush Bret from behind. And I said he's then on the verge of giving Bret the pedigree, at which point, hell freezes over who hits the ring but the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. He gives Hunter, who's got his arms preoccupied trying to give Bret the pedigree, gives him the sweet chin music. And then either Bret goes over at that point, or you could set it up for a four-way with Bret and Shawn against Hunter and Vinny, and they were all they're all kind of, I saw their eyes all widening and going, wow, this is pretty wild, and beyond all that, none of the smart marks had any preconception, so it would have been really like earth-shattering, so to speak. But unfortunately, Bret had to, he claimed he had some bullshit thing with Lloyd's of London that he could only have that one match or something like that, so he had to kind of decline or some bullshit. But as I said before, one of the main things with any type of a situation is, maximizing the potential of it and putting the pieces in place, and it's got to be fairly simple and cut and dried. That's one of the biggest problems I see with WWE these days, is they have this kind of gratuitous flinging shit against the wall mindset where they do way too much. I think you got to, be a lot more pronounced and defined in what you're doing. Do less, but make it mean more. I think they need to tell the underneath guys, you guys are essentially like the opening act at a, if you got a rock concert and you got the Rolling Stones or whoever the hell is the main act. You don't want the opening act smashing guitars and stomping on gerbils and urinating on the stage or whatever the hell. You got to kind of recognize what your role is just to warm the crowd up. And there needs to be a lot more kind of method to the madness, for want of a better term.
Well, was that an answer or what? You have a second question there, sir.
With like the UFC and MMA gaining popularity in the 90s and really blowing up in the 2000s. I live in the Illinois, Iowa area, and they had a lot of camps out here, the MMA camps, and they had like the fighters like Tim Sylvia, Matt Hughes, and even Brock Lesnar came out here to train. My question would be, back in the day, if UFC was so popular, do you think the Dungeon would have trained MMA fighters?
Oh, yeah, there was a pronounced correlation. I know they did that so-called shoot fight down in the Dungeon. It was part of one of the pay-per-views with Owen against Ken Shamrock, and Dan the Beast Severn was the guest referee. And my dad was of the opinion that UFC was every bit as rigged or whatever as WWE, and he was quite outspoken, and pointing that out to both Ken and Dan when they were down there. And my dad was saying, it's funny, it's almost come full circle, because when my dad was breaking in back in the late 1920s, early 30s, he said pro wrestling wasn't a hell of a lot different than UFC. They didn't have the cage, but it was essentially, devoid of too many gimmicks, too many so-called high spots and a lot of that stuff. But it's essentially just looking like they were trying to beat each other, and there was not a lot of kind of extra curricular, bullshit. And my dad kind of said that it kind of had evolved, at one point where it should have, been on the right track, and they kind of took a few wrong turns in the road with, it was always like some things would get a reaction, like Gorgeous George or some of that, and instead of kind of doing it with, some common sense, that was one of the unfortunate problems with wrestling promoters back then, Jack Pfeffer types and some of the guys in Tennessee and some of those, where they would go overboard on gimmicks and stuff, and that's one of the problems now. They got so many extra things. It's tough to keep track of, even if you're, kind of on the inside like we are. I'm all too often shaking my head and saying, I don't know what the hell, how to even interpret this or where it's going, or, there's 10 belts and I don't know, the Universal's more important than the world, or what the difference between the Intercontinental and the United States, and the one Divas belt and the others, and like there's way too much. I think you got to recognize, say you look at the NFL, it's one of the most successful leagues in the world, but they don't have they have the Super Bowl and the Ultimate Bowl and the Intercontinental Bowl, or, if they did, I don't think it would make it any better. It'd be, if anything, people would be saying, what the hell's the point? And I think WWE needs to stand back and say, geez, we got to cut back on a lot of the, not just the belts, but the swerve finishes and the characters that are either duplicating each other or kind of negating each other. And there's a lot of things like that where they got to be a lot more systematic and just kind of, my dad always used to say it, and I would agree more so now than ever, that they've gotten so far out that they can't get back in. Anytime you watch Raw or a pay-per-view, well, 2/3 of the finishes are, swerve finishes, run-ins, DQs, interferences, ref bumps, pulling gimmicks out from under the, to the point where, a straight pin is almost the anomaly these days, or it's kind of like, whoa, that guy must be on his way out, or he must have got fired, or he must have pissed somebody off in the office because, he actually did a job in the middle, heaven forbid, all this type of stuff, So, yeah.
I want to get back to the question, though, here, Bruce, real quick. And the question was, do you think if Stu Hart was alive today, he would be training wrestlers for MMA in the dungeon? And I think when you look back at the history of professional wrestling and you talk about guys like Luther Lindsay or guys like Lou Thez, or perhaps maybe the most the one that transcends amateur and professional wrestling, and that's Danny Hodge. One of the most prestigious awards you can win as an amateur wrestler is the Dan Hodge Award. Well, Danny Hodge was, a great professional wrestler, and you look at all these guys who had successful amateur careers from about 1900 to about 1950, guys like Robin Reed, who, was an Olympic gold medalist, and then he spent 10 years as a professional wrestler. So I think logically, professional wrestling and UFC used to be the same thing.
UFC's almost just kind of reinvented. It's an old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
And like a lot of the old-timers also say is, if Frank Gotch woke up tomorrow from his grave and looked around, he would walk over to the UFC because he would assume that's wrestling today. He would look at whatever this is that WWE does, this sports entertainment, is something entirely different than the game that Gotch was doing.
Yeah. I got a caller from area code 254. What's your question for Bruce?
I'm Scott. I'm calling from Texas.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
Okay.
I'm good,
yeah,
sir.
what's
How are
your
you?
question?
Oh, I just wanted to know what your advice was for aspiring indie talent in the business.
You've come to the right person because let me just give my number one piece of advice. If you want to become a professional wrestler and you want to actually be successful at this, I don't mean just go out there and wrestle in front of your parents and let them see how proud they should be of their 30-year-old son who's finally made it as a wrestler and made $5 for going out there and getting some color that night with another guy who doesn't belong in the business. Okay, check it out. You want to be a real wrestler, you want to make a living in this business, talk to people like Bruce Hart. Talk to people who were on top somewhere. Talk to people who actually did something. If there's an old-timer that you've never heard of and he says he's been a wrestler for 20 years and you've never heard of him, he's full of shit. Don't listen to anything he says because he is going to destroy your career and you're going to end up a loser just like him, bragging to some dumb kid about how you've been a veteran for 20 years. And it's like, well, son of a bitch, where were you over at? Why should you listen to that? Who are you going to listen to? You're going to listen to Ric Flair? You're going to listen to Joe Blow, who likes to talk about his successful wrestling career that didn't even extend 5 miles geographically. And that's all I want to say. I'll let Bruce talk because Bruce is over. Bruce did train many great wrestlers. Many wrestlers were stolen by WWE and are now in WWE's Hall of Fame because Bruce got them notoriety first in Stampede Wrestling, and now I'll shut the hell up.
I think they need to go back to the basics. That's one of the biggest mistakes or one of the biggest shortcomings I see in a lot of the new wrestlers, the aspiring wrestlers these days, is they seem to have a gimmick and a weird haircut and, a name and some kind of diva escorting to the ring, all the other. But most of them haven't done any wrestling or they don't seem to have any grasp. I would advocate to any of them familiarize yourself with the fundamentals of the basics, and pretty cut and dried. You need to know a lot of the basic holds, and you need to know at some point you need to start becoming a bit of a specialist, figure out what your strong suits are, whether you're if you're a big, heavy set guy, it's probably better for you to become a heel, or if you're kind of athletic and agile and whatever, maybe a bit of a face, but the biggest part these days is it's very difficult within the parameters of so-called indie promotions where it seems like all these guys are working for 3 or 4 different promotions and traveling around, and it's pretty hard to establish some identity or some sense of who you are, I see, they got about half a dozen indie promotions up here in Alberta, most of which are illicit and kind of hit and miss. But see guys wrestling, one night as a heel, another night as a face, another night under a different name, and that seems to be the case all over the place. And some of the indie promoters need to maybe start working interactively with each other, and maybe that's kind of the history of the NWA back in the day. There was a lot of promotions all over the North America and Canada and the States or whatever, and they were all almost running against each other, stealing each other's talent and trying to undercut and all the other. And I think at some point in the 1940s there, my dad said it was kind of like the movie The Godfather, where all the heads of the crime families got together and they decided it was in their best interests to work together and have one champion and that kind of thing. And I think some of the indie promoters need to be doing that, and I also think it would be in the best interests of the WWE to sanction and work interactively with the more respectable indie promoters. And I think the promoters need to raise the bar too. They got guys who don't look like they could make the amateur wrestling team in junior high, and they're out wearing belts, and there's little skinny guys with bad tattoos and bad haircuts and homemade outfits, and it's all well and good to kind of play house or whatever, but at some point you need to raise the bar as far as people's perception of you, because
can I ask Scott a couple questions here? Scott, are you a wrestler now?
No,
you're not. How old are you, sir?
Me? 40.
And are you interested in becoming a wrestler? You're pretty late in the game.
No. I'm involved in other ways. I do video production and referee.
Okay. How long you been doing that for, Scott?
I trained in 92 for a little bit, and then in 99, when I was an adult, I trained.
So you've been around quite a while.
Yeah.
I think everything Bruce is saying is very valid, but I think there's a lot of kids who are listening, and it's just they're so lost. I've been doing this, in this business for 13 years. I think the first thing you have to do is you have to learn to respect the sport you want to be a part of. And this sport didn't start in 1983 when Vince McMahon bought the WWE from his father. This business started at the dawn of time. Wrestling is the oldest and most natural sport on the earth, and you have to be a real critical thinker. If you want to make money in this business today, there's great opportunity because there's so many people doing it wrong that if you can figure out how to do it right. And I think what's so important is believing that this business is real. When you watch a wrestler scramble desperately, you see the desperation on a heel's face when he thinks he's going to lose the match. You get sucked into it, and you start to believe it because he believes it. And a lot of these guys are going out there, and they're going through the motions, and they're doing things that they saw on Monday Night Raw last week because they're emulating their heroes. And when you're young, you tend to emulate the growing men that you enjoy.
To interject there, Matt, one of the most egregious mistakes most of these guys are making is trying to be a damn copy of somebody that's in WWE or whatever. It's like the old.
I'll give you a great example. We got this kid that flies out here to wrestle on the TV show I work on out here. His name is Caleb Conley, and I think he comes from the Carolinas or Virginia. And when you watch this kid, he's so incredibly believable. Great heel. And I was trying to pick apart, who is this kid? I've seen him before. And sure enough, he's this odd combination of Dr. D, David Schultz, and stunning Steve Austin. He's nothing like Stone Cold Steve Austin, but he is definitely this weird, stunning Steve Austin, David Schultz, and people today don't know who David Schultz is. And so that's a great person to emulate.
Yeah.
Another great guy who was in Portland was a guy named Al Madrill. The Latin lover Al Madrill was a veteran.
Yeah.
Wrestled 30 years.
Yeah, great
and
worker.
In the later part of his career here in Portland, he was a great carpenter. He knew how to build up these young guys who really weren't that good.
He was
and he could make them look great. Al Madrill plays a 5-year-old spoiled rotten girl on her birthday. And now, that probably doesn't make any sense, but if you think about, like, a 45-year-old man who's embodying the most spoiled rotten 5-year-old kid is exactly what wrestling is, and it makes you pay attention to him because he's throwing a temper tantrum. He's a full-grown man, and he's throwing a temper tantrum. And that's just one example. So pick an old wrestler that people don't know.
Aspiring.
Yeah.
Most of the guys you see are, not to be putting them down, but they're kind of like a worn-out copy or cheap imitation of somebody that, I see most of the indie shows. I would tell any of them, dare to be different, strive to chart a new course, and that's the way to get over. But it takes a while, and it's a very trial and error type thing. You need to be, acutely aware of what fans are buying and what they're not buying and changing it. And back in my day, you'd work 5 days, 6 days a week, and you had a really good opportunity to kind of refine your skills because you'd be getting feedback from the guys you were working with and the fans and the promoters. But nowadays, as an indie guy, it must be very hard. You work one shot here, one shot there against different guys, and there's probably no TV and none of the fixed variables that there used to be. So it's that much harder to kind of establish your ring style, and beyond that to establish your reputation. It's a lot more of a hit and miss thing. As I said before, I think it would be a good step in the right direction if some of these indie promoters were working more interactively with each other, swapping talent and sharing perspectives, and maybe working under some quasi NWA thing, or you had the Northwest Alliance or something like that. And it's just like anything else, you got to have a little bit of a structure or a framework that you're working under. That was all the old NWA was, or you had these, you have these regional like baseball leagues or hockey leagues, and you have some title or cup that you're playing for, whatever. But I think wrestling needs to almost go back to that.
You got to get back to the basics before you can even do that, because you got to remember, 5 out of 6 wrestling promoters are a mark, and they're running a show because they want to be part of the business. And until the wrestlers
and they're not running it very well either. They're not. For want of a better term, the backup, Mr. Dress Up, backyard Mr. Dress Up thing.
Yeah, it's make believe. It's Halloween every weekend.
Yeah, and the fans, are acutely aware of it, and both the only fans out there, not to be putting it down, are just friends and family, and it's pretty tough to evolve into anything bigger and better from that kind of,
Well, and that goes back, Bruce, really, it goes back to the wrestlers. And wrestlers, if you're listening to this, and I know you are, stop being so damn desperate. You don't have to bump for 40 people every weekend. Have some pride. Have some respect for the business, Men paved the road for you for 100 years, and you go out there and act like marks, and it's embarrassing, If you go to the Cauliflower Alley Club, you can see more marks wrestling in the ring, than you will see wrestlers. All the wrestlers are sitting outside the ring because they weren't paid to wrestle, and so they're not going to wrestle. Have a little respect for yourself.
Yeah, you need to, the promoters are probably the biggest fly in the ointment, but at some point those promoters need to be just cut to the chase and say, hey, tonight we're going to mostly wrestle. We're going to just, for want of a better term, the back to the basics, grab a hold. We're not going to have any nut shots tonight, and we're not going to have any run-ins. We're not going to have any swerve finishes. And even though there's a few idiots in the crowd that are going to be going boring or whatever, we got to stay the course and re-educate them. But
as Roddy Piper told me, Roddy Piper never once cut a promo on television for the people that were in the arena. He cut a promo on television for the people at home that he was trying to get to come next week. So if you're content with wrestling in front of 40 people, by God, keep doing it. But don't expect other people in the business to take you seriously or treat you with the same level of respect that they're going to treat men and women who really go for it all the way like all the men and women in Bruce's family.
Yeah, and I think you made a point there about take you seriously. You need to take yourself seriously.
Amen. A
lot more so than most of these guys are. They don't seem to have any. If you speak to half of them, they don't even. And you say, "What is your character? What are you actually endeavoring to become, or what?" And in most cases, they can't even give you any good answers. They just, well, somebody told me to do this, or that kind of thing. You got to be a lot more hands-on, and you got to be, charting your course and kind of, taking it like a lot of the things we've been saying on this program, as far as taking stock of what talent or what attributes you have, and keep climbing the ladder, not just kind of being happy to be stuck in some Mickey Mouse little backyard bullshit promotion. You get 3 bookings a year or something like that, and you call yourself a professional wrestler. You got to, at some point, kind of...
if you're not paying your bills with it, you're not a professional. That's what that means. Like, there's professional cheeseburger flippers at McDonald's. They pay the rent by flipping cheeseburgers. I got more respect for them than guys that, pretend they've been a wrestler for 15 years and they haven't been outside a 5-mile radius from their one promotion that nobody wants to go to. And if I could give you 2 pieces of advice is also, number one is there's something very human in this idea that we do not like to cut our losses. When we've invested into something, we find it very difficult to separate ourselves from that. And so we'll continue down a losing track because it's like, well, I've already invested 4 years of my life into being a shitty wrestler. I got to be a shitty wrestler for the next 15 years. It's like, no, cut your losses. Go somewhere where they want you to be better. And if that better promoter tells you, no, I'm not booking you, you're shit, ask him, how do I get better? What do I need to do to get on TV at your place so I can make money? And the other thing I want to say is that Frank Gotch and Dr. Benjamin Franklin Roller in 1911 didn't have to throw one single drop kick, and they were selling out audiences, making millions of dollars every single year. So less is more, and they made you believe it was real, and that's really the ultimate thing is go out there and believe. Believe in you, believe in your character, find a character you can believe in, and become that person.
You don't need to be acknowledging to every mark that it's a work or any of that. You almost need to go back and people laugh at that and act like you're living in the past or you're out of touch. But for all intents and purposes, you need to go back 50, 60 years or whatever the hell and reestablishing. And the promoters and the wrestlers both need to follow that, because most of the promoters, as you guys already alluded to, and I agree with, they're kind of second-rate marked idiots themselves. They're just playing house, and they do little or nothing to raise the bar or, give people any reason to take it seriously. If I go to most of those shows and I come out of it, I may be even more cynical than most people because I've been around it at a higher level, but you just sort of shake your head and say, man, this is pathetic. It's
did that
so
answer your
removed.
question, Scott?
Yeah. But anyway, we'll proceed.
I think with
to the
Blue
next...
Scott's mind, he couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
Do we have another caller, Bob?
I think we have another caller coming in here from area code 360, but just give me a second.
That's my hometown.
What's your name, and welcome to Hart Beat Radio, and you got a question for Bruce.
Yeah, it's Stuart from Vancouver, Washington. How you doing today?
Not too bad. How are you?
I checked a little bit on, you guys have been talking about some of the issues within the wrestling industry. I've looked at the singles, but one thing that we really haven't talked about today is tag teams. Tag team wrestling for me was one of the things that I enjoyed the most out of Stampede Wrestling back in the days. When you had guys that competed there. Back in the late 70s and early 80s. I mean, one of our big ones obviously was guys like Dynamite and Bret Hart as a team back in the late 70s, early 80s. You add guys like Bruce and Pillman as the the Bad Company, obviously one of the best of all time, and then you had the Bulldogs there, Cuban Commandos, so many others that were there. Portland had strong tag teams like Rip Oliver and the Assassin, or Billy Jack and Kurt Hennig, and then you go into Texas and the Southwest, and you go into Florida, and you go in all over the place. And now what we basically have done is changed our look for tag team wrestling. I mean, it's almost a lost art. I'm looking at the WWF tag teams. Guys like the Killer Bees, for example, phenomenal tag team. Watching the Fabulous Rouge or the Bulldogs or Hart Foundation or whatever else. But it seems like, this last pay-per-view they did, it was all 3-man teams and 6-man teams and everything else, and not even looking to actual tag teams. I can't even recall who the tag team champions are right now. For these promotions,
yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think the tag teams have really been bastardized and lost in the shuffle to the point where they're hard to take seriously. Even I see, for example, the Shield. They're not sure if there's like 3 guys, so you're not sure who the team even is. Or when they had the New Day, they had Kofi and Biggie and Xavier, and I'm wondering what the hell, like back in the day you had Davey and Dynamite, or you had Hawk and Animal, or you had Action Smash, or Gibson and Morton and stuff like that. They had it down to an art too, where they would have these long matches, and they would have the hot tags, and they would have the long-standing feuds and all that stuff. But
one of the things I really enjoyed about the tag team was the fact that these teams that were put together with some sort of thought. There was it wasn't just I'm going to pick up you guy and put this guy together, and it seemed that there was some sort of idea or premise behind what a team should be.
They would have matching costumes, and there would be some common denomination. Nowadays, I see these guys not even wearing the same color of trunks. I think it's complicated, too, by the fact that WWE in its infinite wisdom seems to have 2 of everything, 2 sets of tag champions right now. If you had back then, maybe the Killer Bees as the champions at the same time as the Bulldogs, I don't think it would have made things any better.
No.
It's more.
I think it's kind of like that old the political correctness complaint of if every kid gets a participation ribbon, then why does a child need to try to succeed for something?
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it's not even that they're quality teams that they're putting together. As I said, they're just sort of slapping 2 guys together. Hey, you know what? I think this guy sort of, looks like this guy, so we'll put them as a team, even though they have completely different styles. But not even that, but also, the build-ups behind all of this, they've relegated all of the championships right now to basically second-rate, status. Tag team especially, because that used to be the thing that was the thing you looked forward to in the main event was, tag team mayhem, because you had a referee who had tough time controlling the guys, and the teams legitimately looked like they wanted to go out and do some business, and nowadays it's like if I don't catch this spot, or if I don't do this spot or whatever else, it's a meaningless match, and I'm going, that's not what the point of the match was.
Oh yeah, I think another thing that's complicated and compromised it is they've had way too many switches. The Usos were faces, now they're heels, and the Shield, have been heels and faces and heel. Back in the day, you didn't see like the British Bulldogs switching to heel and and then face, and you didn't see Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels switching heel, and
no.
It's confusing, and it's usually for no even, I don't even know why the hell they switched the Usos. They didn't really get mega heat as heels, and they weren't really mega over as faces either, and even near the end there they had Big E and them kind of where you weren't sure if they were going half-assed heel or faces, and it's all to me reflective of kind of incompetent booking, where you got way too much going on, and after a while, there's no method to the madness. People are just kind of like shaking their heads, and after a while you don't even know who's who or what's what, or what tag belt's more important than the other, or if they even mean anything, and the people calling the shots need to maybe sit down and clearly define what they're seeking to accomplish and start kind of becoming a lot more focused on, what they're doing and doing away with a lot of the irrelevant, pointless crap.
Stuart, you brought up a really interesting point about the costumes, and I find it so interesting. I don't watch WWE. I try to turn it on a couple times a year just to see if I can get back into it. But it seemed like the New Day were wearing the matching costumes, and they found so much success with that team. It just makes me wonder, why haven't they tried to repeat it? And why haven't they taken another half dozen guys and put them in matching costumes and tried to repeat that success that all of us are used to of tag teams from the past?
Oh, don't you remember the ridiculous they did with all the machines, for God's sake, when they had, 15 different machines all dressed up in the same costume? It is, the thing is, do they not even look at their own network for their archive shows from days gone by to see why certain things were successful? I mean, it's like they're trying to throw something at a wall to see if it sticks, and that to me doesn't work. I mean, as a fan of the business for 30 plus years, it's embarrassing to not even go back in time, where we can take a look at what has been successful. I mean, you can tweak it to current day and that sort of thing, but I mean, take a look at the teams that were successful. You're right, the outfits were similar, but also, I mean, they complemented each other. I mean, this guy's style worked really well with this guy's style. And nowadays it's like, well, this guy does his own stuff, this guy does his own stuff, and we'll just sort of, mix it up in the middle. And that, to me, is not an efficient or effective team, and it's very tough to sell it to a general public.
I think one of the big underlying reasons for a lot of this dysfunction is, like back in the day, a guy would come into a territory, have his so-called run, and they would leave. Nowadays, though, they got all these teams that are stale, kind of overexposed, all that other, and there's no place to send them, and they hang around, and because they've run their course as a face, they turn them heel, or they have them do jobs, or they have them switch roles, or like I've seen so many of them, the Joe Hennigs and the Damian Sandows and the Bo Dallas, and they have them reconstituted. Even old Bray Wyatt was a lame gimmick before that, and I think it would be to their advantage if there was some place to send guys, or there was, even if WWE started off, a bogus rival promotion and sent guys there or something, but that's one of the prevailing problems. They got all these guys who are sticking around long past their due date, so to speak, and there's no place to send Big Show, or no place to send Kofi or whoever and the guys have kind of run their course. And then
part of that illusion, Bruce, that gets diminished there with WWE is it's the fact that it's a corporation that's sending an employee somewhere, whereas when I was a kid, and undoubtedly when you gentlemen were children, it was like you were the champion of the Pacific Northwest, and then you went to ply your trade as a sportsman in another area, and you became the champion of, Mid-South or Continental or whatever.
You go to Texas.
And it wasn't you were being degraded, being sent somewhere means you're not good enough. You're going back down to AA because you're not ready for AAA or whatever.
Back in the day, most of these guys would, they would build to some big climactic showdown with one of their arch rivals, and then you'd leave the territory, and then you'd come back maybe a year later, and you were kind of hot again, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be more like that, if I'm a wrestling fan and I'm seeing Big Show, being recycled one more time, or even right now, they got poor old Kane, or they got, Usos and guys like that are being remolded into something, and you already know pretty much what they are, because you have this kind of surplus of all these old guys, so to speak. A lot of the new guys that are maybe coming up, are being compromised too, because they, you got all these other incumbents, so to speak, that are kind of occupying the top spots, and you're less inclined to be pushing some new guy from NXT or some new Japanese guy or whatever, and you really need to be doing that. That was kind of the nature of one of the compelling things about wrestling back in the day was you always had new guys coming in that were going to challenge, and the ominous new heel and the hot new baby face and that kind of thing. And it's tougher when you have all the guys that are already there and they can't send them anywhere. So you constantly, and I think that's even probably one of the reasons why they have too many belts and too many other things, because they think they're trying to accommodate all the pre-existing. There's a lot of egocentricity in it as well, and you're there for long enough and you feel like you're part of the family, so it's tough to ask this guy to leave or this guy to do a job in the middle and all that kind of stuff, but those are all things that I think need to be addressed, and they need to find out some better ways to deal with those things.
I'm going to welcome area code 618. Tell us where you're calling from and your name and your question for Bruce Hart. Welcome, area code 618.
Well, this is the BBM, Ballistic Brent Myers. I am calling out of Michigan Sports Camps. I am sitting there with Dan the Beast Severn. We got some training going on in just about an hour or so, but I wanted to call in and show my support, and I do have a question for Mr. Bruce Hart there. Bruce, I wanted to ask you, how was it working around the Dynamite Kid and being involved with him and stuff like that? How was the guy in and out of the ring?
I would say among the best wrestlers I've ever seen in my life. I think the best thing about Dynamite, beyond he was an incredible athlete and an innovative, cutting-edge type performer, but he was always more concerned with getting the other guy over, whoever his opponent was. About 80% of what Dynamite did was conducive to making the other guy look good, and he would take those incredible bumps, and he had a really innate sense of making it look 100% like a shoot. He'd do his high spots as good as anyone I've ever seen in the business, but he didn't just do them as high spots. It was always kind of, he would only do a few, but he would build to this penultimate climax, and, if and when he did the upside down turnbuckle or the big, hit the ceiling backdrop or something like that, it was in the context of the fight, and, he'd go, whoa, but he just had a very, innate sense of what the business was, and he looked like a fighter. Everything he did was for a purpose. He wouldn't just do stuff for no reason, and it was always within the context of a fight. It always looked like an ass kicker, shoot type thing, and
right.
I wish some of the I see a lot of the guys today, and I sort of feel sorry for these guys who are going out and just doing high spots or trying to cater to the, end quote, holy shit marks who, that's like the tail wagging the dog in my estimation if you got a bunch of marks dictating what you're doing, and
right.
To me, it's one of the most egregious oversights in WWE that you got people like The Godfather and Jacqueline and Jimmy Garvin are all in the Hall of Fame, but Dynamite Kid's not in the WWE Hall of Fame, which is like you go and say what, this is like Wayne Gretzky not being in the Hockey Hall of Fame or something like that, nor is Davey Boy's another one who's like two of the most iconic, revered, respected superstars in the history of the business, not just in WWE but all over the world, but they're not worthy of the Hall of Fame, nor I might add, is my brother Owen. Anyway, forgive my cynicism.
I'd like to thank Brent and Stuart and Scott and Don for calling in, and of course Matt Merz, the man himself, has done so much work for Hart Beat Radio. And Matt, if you could come on for a couple of minutes, give us some final thoughts.
I highly, highly, highly recommend you go to youtube.com/legit pro wrestling, your home for Portland wrestling, and check out the very best of Hart Beat Radio. I just put up 6 hours of Bruce Hart telling his entire life story, talking about the history of Stampede Wrestling when he was booking and teaching men like Chris Benoit and so on and so forth. You already know all the names, so I don't even have to say them. Go watch these 3 shoot interviews with Bruce Hart. Volume 1, A Life in Wrestling. Volume 2, Stampede Wrestling versus WWE. Volume 3, The Hart Family's Next Generation. And check it out. Next week, I am going to put up Bruce talking about just some of his general memories of Stampede Wrestling throughout his entire life. And some of the names we are going to go back to are incredible, like the Christies and the Osbornes and the Mummy. And you're going to learn so much about Stampede Wrestling and professional wrestling history, because the truth is, Stampede is one of the finest promotions in the history of the professional wrestling business. So if you don't know Stampede Wrestling's history, then I would dare say you don't understand the history of the wrestling business. And so you need to stop talking and start listening, because there's a reason God gave you one mouth but 2 ears. So listen. Listen to people who know more than you. If you can point to a man and say he had real success in the wrestling business, listen to what the man has to say.
Very well put.